All right, last time before the last, when we started with the book of Daniel, we were looking at the experience of Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, when they were taken to Babylon and put in the king's service, educated for 3 years. And what we saw is that this captivity took place during the first invasion of Nebuchadnezzar into Palestine, when he took away the king of he took away the king of Judah and put another king in his place, and he carried away most of the nobility, the upper class of people from among the Jews, and carried them to Babylon, where they became his servants. And this included Daniel and his three friends. We also saw that Daniel and his friends resolved in their hearts that they would not eat the food that the king provided. It's a little challenging story because it's difficult to understand exactly why they didn't eat the food, because some people say it was because they were vegetarians, and that seems to be true. Some people say it is because the food was offered to idols, and that may have some truth in it. But the thing is that, first of all, I don't know that vegetarianism was practiced in Israel, was widely practiced. I don't know that God's people were practicing vegetarian. So it's a strange thing to find these three boys were vegetarians, because of course we know that the diet that God gave to the Hebrews included flesh food, lamb, goat, cow, deer, so on. And they certainly were heavy users of butter and milk. So when they went to Babylon and they refused to eat the king's meat, they asked for pulse. They asked for vegetarian material. They had a specific diet in mind that they asked for. So it seems like they were not just aiming, because they could have asked for meat that was not offered. But they never mentioned food offered to the idols. They simply said, give us vegetarian food instead of flesh food. That's what they asked for. And they were so confident that they said that after 10 days, they were sure they would be more healthy looking than the people who were feeding on the popular Babylonian diet. So it seems that they specifically asked for a vegetarian diet, and it is a strange thing because, as I've said, there's no evidence that I can think of in the Old Testament that the Hebrews or the Jews were anything but regular meat eaters, just that they avoided certain kinds of meat. So I always wonder about this with the four Hebrew boys, because the only time you can find restrictions on diet among the Jews was when somebody took a Nazarite vow, special kind of vow, and then what they kept away from was strong drink like wine. But I don't know of any case where I can think of people like John the Baptist. I know John the Baptist was fed on locusts and wild honey, but he was a type of Elijah, and Elijah ate flesh because the Bible says God sent ravens to feed Elijah with flesh. So it's just one of those stories that I'm not quite clear why they ask specifically for a vegetarian diet. I know that today we can look at it and a lot of people say, well, it means that God's people in the last days are going to be vegetarian. I don't know if I can take that lesson from it, but at the same time, it still doesn't answer the question of why Daniel and his friends were vegetarian, chose to be vegetarian, and refused to eat the king's meat. So anyway, with that in mind, what we know is that because of their commitment, they were especially committed to God, and their faithfulness, even in eating what they believe God wanted them to eat. This caused them to be specially blessed. And the Bible mentions that Daniel had special understanding in visions and dreams. So clearly, even before Nebuchadnezzar had his dream, his famous dream, even before this, clearly Daniel was started having visions and dreams, or somehow when people had dreams, God gave people dreams, and somehow Daniel was able to understand them. What I find a little bit interesting is to I wonder how did Daniel know he had this gift? Because these days, especially in a place like Jamaica, you have a lot of people who believe in dreams. But several times people have come to me and told me they had dreams, and what do I think it means? And to be honest, I can look and I can say, well, if God gave you this dream, I could think it might mean this or it might mean that. I'm just kind of guessing. I'm groping in the dark. I don't have understanding in dreams and visions, but the Bible, somehow Daniel came to know. Somehow his friends came to know that Daniel had a special gift in understanding dreams and visions. So anyway, that's the background we have as we go to the Bible and we go to chapter 2. All right. It says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Now it's interesting that it says this happened in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, remember that Daniel and his friends were in Babylon for about 4 years. 3 years, then the king made Daniel and his friends a part of his wise men, his college of wise men, and so on. If this happened in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar, and Daniel was already a prisoner in Babylon, it must have meant that Nebuchadnezzar came to attack Palestine, to attack Judah, and carried away Daniel and his friends in his first year. And then in the second year, when Daniel and his friends were already established in the school that Nebuchadnezzar set up, that's when Nebuchadnezzar had the dream. So it would have meant that it was while Daniel was still a student in the school of Nebuchadnezzar that God used him to interpret this dream, based on the fact that it says this was in the second year. Let me see what it says. I think it says in the first year. It doesn't tell you what year it was of Nebuchadnezzar when he came and attacked Jerusalem. But when he had this dream, it was his second year. So that overthrow of Judah must have been in his first year. Anyway, it says, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. This is one of the verses that I usually use when I'm talking about the spirit, because this verse is one of those that makes it clear that a person has an inward part called the spirit. Because it says Nebuchadnezzar, it doesn't say he was troubled, it says his spirit was troubled. And if we follow the pattern of Trinitarian thinking, we could conclude that Nebuchadnezzar was not troubled, but his spirit was troubled. Two different persons. Because that's what Trinitarians try to do with God. They say God's spirit is troubled. It doesn't mean that God is troubled because they are two different persons. But what this demonstrates is that there's an inward part called the spirit. And when this part is concerned or disturbed, it does not mean that your body is troubled. It means that in your inward being, you are troubled. So it shows that the spirit is really that inward being. So Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams and he's troubled and he can't sleep. You have to know that this dream was striking and unusual, because almost every day we have dreams. I mean, most mornings I have a dream. If I get up early in the morning, like 4 o'clock or a little earlier, sometimes I get up and I spend some time in prayer. I read my Bible. I might answer some emails, and then if nobody's awake, I might lie down and try to get another little nap, like 5 or 10 minutes. And usually in that time, I almost always have a dream. So it's strange that I don't remember dreaming during the night, but if I get a morning nap, I tend to dream. But I know it's just a dream. Some of them are kind of crazy and some of them seem to make sense, but I don't think of them. But there are 2 times in my life when I had 2 dreams. 2 times I had dreams. Well, actually, 3 times. I had 3 dreams. And one of them I remember when I was 16 years old, the other one when I was in my 20s, and the other one when I was in my 30s. But I believe at least 2 of these dreams, they were so striking, so clear, that I can remember the details until today. And I am pretty certain that God was speaking to me in those 2 dreams. The third one, it had some little funny elements in there. I conclude that it wasn't God, but it was graphic as well. But the first dream, I think I've shared with people on our Friday night meeting, because it was a dream I had about Satan sitting on a bus and Satan trying to destroy me when I was 16. But every detail of it is still in my mind. And when I woke up out of my dream, I woke up right away after the dream in the middle of the night, and I was perspiring, and my heart was racing. I was like Nebuchadnezzar. My spirit was troubled. But I was 16 years old, and I didn't even think of the meaning of the dream until years later when I became a Christian. I understood what was being said in the dream, and it had a great significance to me and brought me a lot of comfort later in life. And the second dream I had when I was a young Christian, but at that time I never understood grace properly, and I never understood the love of God properly, but it was striking. And I think God was just trying to give me some comfort, because I dreamed that I awoke out of my sleep. In my dream, I awoke out of sleep. So apparently in my dream I was sleeping. But I woke up, and in my dream everywhere was dark. I could not see anything. I woke up in a dark room. And when I saw a little ray of light, a little flat line over to one side, and I realized that it was a door, and there was light coming under the door. So I opened the door and I pushed out, and I found myself standing on a street. We don't have these kinds of streets in Jamaica, but I guess it made me think of some of the pictures I've seen. It was a street that was straight, and it went on for long, maybe a few miles. And on either side of the street, there were buildings, tall buildings, lining the street on both sides. But all of them, if you have ever seen those pictures of when of places like Iraq or Syria, where they are having war, where you just see these broken down concrete buildings, wood or stone buildings. Everything is gray. Everything is gray, and you see roofs caved in and just dust everywhere. That's what I was looking at. A street completely devastated. Everything was broken down. The buildings half standing, and the street was just straight. I could see right down to the end of the street. And I looked around at this place in amazement, and I wondered, what happened here? It looked like a bomb had exploded and killed everybody. Nothing was living. Just this. The whole world was gray. Everything was gray, and these gray buildings and nothing. And as I stood there looking in bewilderment, I saw a little flash of light down at the end of the street, way down. It was like a corridor that going right down to a little point, right at way down, and I saw a little flash of light down there. And as I looked, I saw an angel flying towards me. The angel came flying up between the buildings at full speed. He had a sword in his hand, pointing out like this. A sword ahead of him, pointing. And I knew he was coming for me. And I knew he was coming to kill me. And it flashed through my mind what had happened. I knew that the world had been destroyed. People had destroyed themselves. The whole world was destroyed. And I was the only person left alive. I knew that the angel was coming to kill me because I belonged to a race that had no right to live. I was the last remaining person, and I had no right to live. And so the angel was coming to kill me and to just finish the human race. And all I did was I closed my eyes and I waited for the blow because I knew that is what I deserved. I knew that that is what our race deserved. And as my eyes were closed and I'm waiting, I don't feel anything. Instead, I hear music. I hear beautiful, sweet music, and I open my eyes in astonishment. Everything is different. I'm on the side of a little slope that is green, beautiful grass. Everything is green and pretty. And in front of me, I see the sky, but it's kind of many colors. And coming up, I can see the sun rising behind the hill, and the music is coming from there. And as I stood there in amazement, I suddenly realized what happened. I realized that instead of destroying me, God had recreated the world and given me a new life. That was before I understood grace, and before I was a young Christian. I never understood much, but in the dream, it was so real. It was like I felt the relief, I felt the appreciation, I felt the gratitude, and I just started walking towards the sunlight, and then the dream ended. But that was the second dream where I think that God, I believe that God was saying something to me. But most of the time, when you hear people come and say they have a dream, it's just because of, like it says in Proverbs, a dream comes from the multitude of business. Your mind is agitated and you have thoughts going through your subconscious. But somehow, when a person has a dream that is extraordinary, even though the Bible calls it a dream, it's not like an ordinary dream. And you all know the difference because we have been having dreams from we were children. How do you know the difference between a dream from abundance of business and a dream from God? I've become wary of people. When people come and say they got a vision or they got a dream, I become a little wary because some people use the word very carelessly. Some people, everything that passes through their mind, they think it's God giving them a dream or a vision. So I'm kind of wary of it. I'm watchful. But this is what I will tell you. When I look at the Bible, this is what I understand. That when you get a vision from God, it is so graphic, you don't know that it's a vision until afterwards. The vision itself is like real life, everything, every detail. And how do I know? Because I remember when Peter was in the prison and the angel came and hit him on his side and said, "Get up." Peter woke up and thought he was having a vision. He thought he was dreaming. And Peter was accustomed to visions because Peter is the one who had a vision of the sheet let down from heaven. And the voice said, "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." He was accustomed to God speaking to him in vision. So he knew what a vision was. So this real life, he thought it was a vision. So my understanding is that a vision is something that is so real, you don't know the difference with real life until afterwards. And I can imagine that when you get a dream that looks like this, you must know it's from God also. So why do we say a dream versus a vision? I would say a dream, you continue to sleep. A vision is when you are awake. But I imagine both of them are just as striking and just as graphic. Okay. So if at this moment I get taken away, then it's a vision. But if when I go to bed tonight and I'm sleeping, I have the same thoughts, the same things go through my mind, then it's a dream because I'm sleeping. But I know the difference from an ordinary dream because this time it is so clear, it is so graphic, everything is so sharp. It's like real life, even though it's a dream. So all of this because I'm trying to look at what happened to Nebuchadnezzar and trying to explain why Nebuchadnezzar was so concerned. Because in his mind, he was sleeping and he visited another reality. Everything was graphic and sharp in his mind.
And these kind of dreams, Brother David, from God, you can't forget it. It's deep in your
Exactly.
mind. You
Yes.
can't never forget it.
Yes. Nebuchadnezzar woke up and everything was graphically in his subconscious or in his even in his conscious mind, and he was sure the gods were trying to speak to him. Now, some time ago, I made a comment that Nebuchadnezzar forgot the dream because that's what I've always understood, and because there is a verse, there's a phrase in the King James version that suggests that he had forgotten the dream. But somebody gave me a correction, and they said that based on other interpretations, it's not that he forgot the dream, but that he did not want to tell them the dream, because if he did, they'd have cooked up an explanation, because people do that all the time. They just make up whatever comes to their mind. So he decided to hang on and not tell them. And he was saying, well, if they can know the interpretation, then they can know the dream as well. So anyway, I looked at it again, and I believe that I don't remember who it was that pointed this out, but whoever it was, I think I agree that you were correct about this. And I'll show you. When you come down to that point, I'll point it out. So it says, then the king commanded to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans. All right, I'm going to have to mute everybody because there's somebody who's having a little issue with his microphone. So one thing you can find out here, one thing you can see here, is that whereas in a Christian congregation you might have a prophet or a Bible student or somebody who is filled with the Spirit, in the policies of pagan kings, you had magicians, you had astrologers, people who got their interpretations from looking at the stars, you had the sorcerers, people who were involved in witchcraft and necromancy, and you had the Chaldeans, who were supposed to be the wise men of Babylon, who also were steeped in Babylonian philosophy and Babylonian religion. And so he called these people, and this was normal. This was normal. Whether it was Egypt or Babylon or Assyria, every kingdom in those days had these wise people whose business it was to guide and direct the king, to assist him in making his decisions. And of course, I suppose if you don't know the truth about God, if you don't know about the true God, it's normal, because Nebuchadnezzar and these kings, whoever they are, they would have concluded, these wise men, the gods that direct the kingdom through these people, have led me to overthrow Judah and Assyria and Egypt. So I am being wisely led. And so, of course, he calls for these people. He calls for them, and he calls for them to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. All right, so he introduces the subject. He says, I have had a dream, and I would like to know the dream. So, of course, it says, then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac. So I'm not sure why the Bible highlights the language that they use, but maybe it was kind of like the language of the learned, like how in the Catholic Church they used to speak in Latin. It was the language of the priests. And in Palestine, the cultured language was Greek, although they spoke Aramaic and Hebrew, and maybe even some Latin, but they spoke Greek as a classical language. That's what the learned people spoke. Anyway, the Chaldeans speak to the king, and they said, O king, live forever. And it simply means, we honor and we respect you, king. It was just a phrase, like God save our gracious king, our gracious queen, king. And so they said, tell us the dream, tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. So for some reason, I suppose there may have been other occasions like this in the past. I suppose. For all I know, Nebuchadnezzar is paying these people a healthy salary. He's paying them, he's feeding, he's supporting them, because in these kingdoms, people like priests and people who communicate with the supernatural world, they did not work like ordinary people. They were supported by the king or from the public purse. And so they are specially treated. And so for some reason, Nebuchadnezzar is feeling upset this morning. He's not feeling in a good mood. And so it seems to me that he recognizes that this dream is of great importance. Somehow, and I suppose you would, because if I go to bed tonight and I happen to go, in my dream, I travel to Mandeville and I see a great image made out of gold, and I see all the people around me and every detail is there. And I'm sure that it's real, every detail, and I hear voices talking to me as clear as day. Every detail. I must know that God is trying to say something to me. I must know. And it becomes imperative that I try to understand. And this is what happens to Nebuchadnezzar. He does not want to be deceived. I suppose, he's a smart man. When you read the story of Nebuchadnezzar, you'll see that he had some stupid ideas, but he was willing to change, and he was ultimately a very smart person. You don't conquer the world if you are not pretty smart. So he made up his mind that this morning he's going to get the truth. He doesn't want any half-baked theories. He wants the truth. And so he hits upon this plan. He's not going to tell anybody the dream. They are going to tell him the dream plus the meaning. And it's, in my opinion, he's not unreasonable. Because if I say I have an ability and you are paying me to do the ability to do the thing, I say I can paint pictures, and you pay me to paint pictures, and the time comes then pictures are to be painted, and I start making statues. No. You are paying me because I have an ability. Now is the time to use your ability. Use it, and I can't use it. You have a right to be very upset. So the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. Now, this is a phrase that I know has been normally interpreted to say, the king is saying, I have forgotten the dream. Because normally when you say something is gone from you, that's what it normally means. But if you look at what it says in the NIV, this is the phrase that whoever it was corrected me and pointed out. The king replied to the Chaldeans, this is the NASB, the command from me is firm. So when it says the thing is gone from me, I'm going to show you a similar phrase that probably carries the idea a little better.
While you're looking up that, Brother David,
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that in the very first verse, it indicated that Nebuchadnezzar didn't have the dream once, he had it several times. So much that he lost sleep. He couldn't sleep. It's like every time he closes his eye to sleep, he got the same dream over again. The guy said he had dreams, plural. And he lost sleep because of it.
All right, let's look at that in a moment, but that's a thought, all right? But I just want us to look at Luke 2 and verse 1. It says, now in those days, a decree went out. I'm kind of comparing it to what it says in Daniel here. The thing is gone from me. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar is saying, the decree or the command is gone out from me. I have made this decree. I have made this command. So he's not saying the dream is gone from me, or I can't remember the dream. He says, the command from me is gone out. I've made this decree. In other words, he's saying, my mind is settled on this matter, right? So when it says in the NASB, the command from me is firm, I'm agreeing with that. Once you see that it means the command is gone from me, then I think that's what it means. And he says, if you will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces and your houses shall be made a dunghill. You will see later on that this is a favorite sentence of Nebuchadnezzar. He likes to threatened to chop up people and make their houses into a garbage heap. It seems he was not a very pleasant king, not a very nice person to get on the wrong side of, but later on, God got a hold of him, which is pretty amazing. Even as I look at it, I'm thinking of how God, some of the most unpleasant people in the Bible, God has mercy on them. And Jamaicans have a way of saying, if God was like man, when somebody does something extremely bad, they always say if God was like man, meaning that if they had it in their power, they would completely torture and wipe out this devil, whoever did what. But God is not like that. That scoundrel Ahab killed Naboth and took his vineyard. And then when the prophet went to him, he repented, and God didn't bring the disaster upon him anymore. Manasseh, the most wicked king in Israel, 55 years he ruled, probably almost single-handedly responsible for the destruction of Judah. Repented in his old age. God forgave him, my goodness, and took him in. And here, Nebuchadnezzar, a man who almost completely destroyed Judah, must have slaughtered hundreds of thousands of the Jews. And now he loves to threaten to chop up people and make their houses into a rubbish heap. And God takes him and turns him around and makes him into a candidate for the kingdom. Pretty amazing. Let me go back to verse 1 and see if what Brother Ian is saying is supported. It says he had dreams. In the NIV, it says he had dreams. All the versions say he had dreams, but I don't know if it has the idea of he had one dream repeatedly, because it doesn't say he had a dream many times or that it was reported. Reading it initially, the impression I get is that it's just saying that Nebuchadnezzar had a night when dreams were in his head. Even though it used the word dreams, I don't understand it to mean several dreams, because sometimes in writing you have this literary liberty that people take, that they pluralize something because it doesn't necessarily mean more than one or two. I'm trying to think if I can like in Jamaica would say, this man is carrying feelings. You don't necessarily mean that the person has several feelings. He might have a feeling of anger towards you, but when you say he's carrying feelings, what you mean is that he's emotionally upset about you. But instead of saying he's carrying a feeling, we say feelings, because it's just how. And I get the impression that this is what it is saying about Nebuchadnezzar. Just my thought on it. All right. So Nebuchadnezzar threatens them, and he threatens that if they don't give the dream plus the interpretation, he's going to kill them, chop them up, and also he's going to remove any honor from their posterity by turning their houses into a garbage heap. But if you will show the dream and the interpretation thereof, if you give me both things, you shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. And based on what we were looking at this morning, you would say that this is carnality. These are the elements of the world. It's in my mind, so I'm sorry why I'm going there, because he's using bribery and threat. He's using the two things that people know in this world: desire for advancement and fear of the negative. Do this. It's like the law, right? It's like the law. The law says if you break the law, you will die. If you keep the law, you will receive favor. You'll be blessed. If you break it, you'll be cursed. Nebuchadnezzar is doing the same thing. He is the law, and he says, if you do what I ask, dream plus interpretation, you shall be blessed. If you don't do what I ask, dream and interpretation, you shall be cursed, chopped in pieces, and your house is made a dunghill. These guys are scared because they know this man. One second. One thing this man is not, and it is a compromising person. He doesn't compromise, and they know it, so they are scared. Yes, go ahead, Brother Ian.
I don't want to beat the point too much, but If you read in verse 1, you notice that the sentence wasn't completed. It says, if you look at other versions, you see this, wherewith his spirit was troubled. In the American King James Version, it says, with which his spirit was troubled. So it's not just the fact that he had a dream, but, and he said, and his sleep broke from him. So it said he had dreams that troubled his spirit, and he lost sleep. That's what it was saying. So it's not just in a general sense, it's talking about dreams. It suggests that whatever he was dreaming prevented him from sleep.
Yeah, I would say in response to that, I mean, I'm not cutting down that interpretation either, but I mean, it still seems to me that there are other alternative maybe. But in response to this, I would say that if you have a dream so graphic, like it happened to me, I had one dream and I woke out of my sleep. I think I went back to sleep afterwards because it wasn't as graphic as Nebuchadnezzar's dream, right? And it wasn't as forceful. But I would think that if you had one dream like that for the night, it would be enough to stop you from sleeping again, just in response to that particular point, without necessarily disagreeing.
Yeah, the only reason why I stress it is because to show that he would not have forgotten it. That's the point I'm driving at.
Okay.
Because if it was just something that is, dreamt and wake up later on, you could say, well, he forgot it. But it was so significant that all of this happened to him. So it's very unlikely that he would forget it.
Right. I mean, God could have deliberately blocked his mind. And it probably wouldn't be the first time that God did this. But I agree with you that under normal circumstances, there's no way he's going to forget this dream. So unless it was a divine intervention that caused him to forget. So they asked the king, these guys, now they are getting scared, and they answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it. The king answered and said, I know of a certainty that you would gain the time. Okay, you're trying to stall for time. Because you see the thing is gone from me. In other words, again, you see that I've given this decree. You see I've made up my mind, and you're trying to gain time. The next reason why I tend to agree is because in a moment you are going to see that Daniel comes in and Daniel asks for time. And he gives Daniel time. So if they had just been asking for time to know the interpretation, he would not have refused. What is the problem is that he says they're asking for the dream plus the interpretation. They're asking for the dream before they give the interpretation. That is what he's not happy about. And he goes on to re-emphasize his point. But if you will not make known unto me the dream, there is but one decree for you. And now he says what has been in his mind, what he has been suspecting all along, because he's not an idiot, and he knows chicanery. If we are familiar with the word, he knows trickery when he sees it. It's like, to use a carnal example. I don't know if any of you ever see wrestling advertised or you ever watch wrestling, and you really wonder if these people expect anybody to believe that this is something serious. Anybody who has any kind of discernment knows that you have boxing is real, judo is real, karate is real, football. But when it comes to wrestling, professional wrestling, these big jokers just go out there and put on an act. If I was ever to watch any sport, that is the last thing I would watch, because it is so clear that they are faking. You climb up and you take a chair and hit another man in his head, and you jump off a place and land on the referee. It's a big joke. And if you have some kind of discernment, you can see right away it's not going to be something that you really are attracted to. But anyway, Nebuchadnezzar is not a fool, and he recognizes that these people, the things he has been hearing from them from time to time, he is suspicious. And now that he gives them a real test, he recognizes what they are trying to do, and he says, look here, you prepare lying and corrupt words to speak before me. He knows what they have been doing all along. And so I'm telling you, tell me the dream, and I will show you, and I will know. If you give me the dream, then I am sure you know the interpretation. It's reasonable, right? I have a dream and I say, Brother Ian tell me what the dream means. He says, I don't know the dream. How can I tell you the meaning? I say, if you can tell me the dream, then I'll know that you know the meaning, because clearly, if you can do this, you're in connection with a supernatural power. That's what Nebuchadnezzar is saying. Men are not able to interpret dreams. If you can interpret dreams, you are in touch with the supernatural realm. And if you are, then you can know the dream plus the interpretation. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. That's their conclusion. Therefore, there is no king, lord, nor ruler that asks such things at any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. So they basically say to Nebuchadnezzar, you're unreasonable king. They don't dare to use the words, but their statement is implying that. No other king ever asked such a thing. How could you ask such a thing? It's unreasonable. Nobody on earth can do this. Nobody can tell you what went on in your mind last night. But of course, if God gave you this dream and God is speaking to the magicians, why shouldn't they be able to get the message from God? So they went on to say, it is a rare thing that the king required. Unusual. Nobody ever did. And there's none other that can show it before the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. Which is very interesting, because they come out right and say, they come right out and say that the only ones who know this are the gods. And right away, they are saying that they are not working with the gods. Even with their concept of the gods, they are saying our work is not based on the gods. And these gods do not dwell with flesh. So then you might ask the question, if they don't have communication with the gods, what was their claim to fame? On what basis were they here claiming to be able to interpret dreams and tell the future if they were not in contact with the gods? And it goes back to the kind of primitive understanding of spiritual things that these people have. Because you see, they believe that you could look at the stars and you could read the stars and tell the future. And they believe that if somebody had a dream, you could say, well, a statue. It's like in Jamaica here. We have a few Jamaicans in the group, and you can tell. If you see a naked woman, it means that somebody is pregnant in your family. If you see, they can tell you if you see certain things, what it is supposed to mean. So they have a system of interpretation of dreams. And if you tell a dream and you can tell the elements or what you saw in the dream, they will make up, they'll give you a meaning as to what it's supposed to mean. It has nothing to do with God or the supernatural world. It's like you have an in-between world where you can get ideas and you can get dreams and you can get thoughts which have nothing to do with God. Yet in some way, it can put you in contact with the future and with some kind of supernatural element. So this is how they operate. And so they say, these gods do not dwell with flesh. They did not know of a God who interacts with human beings. For this cause, the king was angry and very furious and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Now, you can go back to the previous chapter and you'll remember that it says that Nebuchadnezzar had sent Daniel and his friends to school. It says, where does it say? In chapter 1, in verse 5, it says, the king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which they drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years. He sent them to college, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Now the king decides that all of these people are tricksters, they are con men. And clearly he has sent Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah to school to learn to be like these people. Because that's who they are. They are the wise people of Babylon, Chaldeans, astrologers, and so on. And Daniel and his friends fall into that category because they are in school learning how to become the wise men. So when the king gets upset, he doesn't get upset at those who are standing before him. He says, you know what? It's kind of like what is happening in the world today with regards to pastors and religious people. The reputation is so bad, I don't even like when people call me pastor anymore, which is why I really appreciate and love to be called Brother David or David, because there are so many of these pastors who are only interested in making money and in elevating themselves. When you look at people like, and I'm not afraid to call names, Kenneth Copeland, Oral Roberts, Paula White, Benny Hinn, when you look at these people, what they do in the name of God and religion, how could you want to be identified with these scoundrels? And yet what we know is happening, and that is in the world today, they are simply deciding that all Christian people, all pastors, all religious leaders are scoundrels and deceivers. And that is the way life is. People tend to put you in categories and lump you together. And that way they can find an easy way to judge everybody based on what they see in connection with the majority or even with a few. So this happens to Daniel and his friends. They get labeled with the wise men. And so unreasonably, they have not had the chance to talk to the king, but they are looking for them to kill them. They are guilty by association, and they are going to die by association. It says, then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. And again, one thing I can comment on is that any child of God who gets into places where he doesn't belong, you become a slave, you become a prisoner. I'm going to tell you, if you're a child of God, in a short while, they're going to start treating you with favor. Any child of God. Do you know why? And this may not be the most popular thing that I say, but do you know why? Because wherever you are, if they make you into a slave, and I'm saying it to black people, we whose foreparents were enslaved, I'm going to tell you, if you are enslaved and you are still a child of God, and you do your service as if you are serving God, and you are cheerful and you are faithful to your wicked master as if you are doing it for God, no matter who the person is, their attitude towards you will change. It happened to Joseph. It happens to Daniel and his companions. And if we can find any other incidents in the Bible, I'll bet you'll find the same thing. So when Daniel says to Arioch, he begins to argue. Normally, if these men were not outstanding and everybody had them in favor, as soon as he opened his mouth, he would have said, no argument. We're going to the executioner's block. But when Daniel speaks, they are willing to listen because they are deeply sympathetic to Daniel. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so hasty from the king? Then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time and that he would show the king the interpretation. And so again, you can see that it's not that Nebuchadnezzar is against giving them some time. He's not that unreasonable. The problem with the other wise men is that they didn't just want time. They wanted information. They wanted to know the dream. And so Nebuchadnezzar was furious because they were demanding of him the one thing he was determined not to give them. Daniel does not ask for the dream. All he asks is for a little time because Daniel knows his God and he knows the gift God has given him and he knows the mercy and the love of God. And so he knows that God has a purpose for his life. And so he goes to the king and says, hold on, king, don't be so quick to cut off our heads. Give us a little time. Just give me a day. And so, of course, the king also is not an unreasonable person in some ways, in most ways. And so he gives him the time. And then Daniel went to talk. Yes, Brother Ian.
I also wanted to just add there that normally in those days, most times when a king gives his decree or his command, he doesn't pull it back unless whatever he asks for come to be. Remember what happened with the king of Darius and Cyrus, kings of the Medes, when he threw Daniel into the lion's den, and he couldn't put back his word because he had already signed the decree. Same thing happened in time of Esther, why the king had to make a second decree to cancel the first one. So it seemed to, and even John the Baptist in the case of Herod. So there's a pattern where kings, when they give their decree, they don't pull it back. It's almost forbidden for them to pull back their word. So when he said that the thing is gone from me, my command is sure. I've already sent out the decree. They were trying to buy time to stretch it out because they realized that this king was serious and he couldn't pull back whatever he said.
Yeah. The same thing happened when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. The king was so sorry, and Daniel was his friend, but he had given the command and he couldn't do otherwise. So but Daniel goes to his house and he calls his friends and he makes them know what is going on. And first of all, you know, the prayer of two or three tends to carry more power for some reason than the prayer of one person. Plus, their lives were in jeopardy as well because they fell into that category also. So he tells his friends that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So they go to prayer. It says, then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. So God comes to him in a vision. Perhaps he can't sleep that night. Maybe he's spending the whole night in fasting and prayer. And while he's doing this, he has a vision. And God makes him know. And immediately, when Daniel, I mean, this interpretation is not for Nebuchadnezzar only. It brings great joy to the heart of Daniel because remember, Daniel is a prisoner in Babylon and he has seen the great damage that Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar have done to his people. So he sees this vision and he's filled with happiness because he understands that with all that is going on, my God is still in charge. So he says, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings and he setteth up kings. This is what he sees from the vision, and it gives him a lot of happiness, as I say. He knows that Babylon's time is limited. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. He's rejoicing that God has given him wisdom and knowledge, that God has revealed these things to him. And I know you can understand this too. I can speak for myself. There are times when God opens up something to my understanding, and I feel the same kind of joy. I just thank God for giving wisdom and understanding because, when you receive this kind of enlightenment, you are aware from the beginning that this is not something I dug up myself. It's not something I searched out myself. This is something that God has opened to my understanding. And it's really a marvelous and uplifting recognition. You really want to praise and glorify and thank God for a very long time. And this is what Daniel is doing. In the middle of the night, he's in his room jumping about and praising God. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. He's given over to eloquence. I thank thee and I praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and hast made known unto me now what we desired of thee. For thou hast now made known unto us the king's matter. So he openly thanks God right there in his room. Therefore Daniel went in unto Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him, destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The Bible doesn't say a lot about some things, but if you notice, the implications are graphic, because he doesn't come, Arioch does not go to the king and say, there is a man from the captives of Judah. He comes to the king and says, I have found. And you can see that Arioch is trying to get a little bit of self advancement out of this, right? I don't know if he remembers that Daniel already went into the king, but he comes to the king, and he wants to get a little bit of promotion for himself. And the words are very interesting. I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. So I suppose the king just ignores him, or whatever. The king knows very well who this person is and already spoke to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation thereof? Nebuchadnezzar is a little cautious. He doesn't want to be tricked again. He doesn't want to be in the presence of any more tricksters. So even though Daniel comes in and he remembers, this is a youth who was brought in before me yesterday. So he comes in and he says, are you able to make known to me? Notice he says again, he's careful, the dream and the interpretation. Are you able? And he wants to know that he's not going to be tricked. Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king hath demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers cannot show unto the king. So first of all, make sure, and he sets the king straight about these people that he has in his kingdom and that he has paying this huge salary. He does not even say, I can do it, because he is listed among the wise men, and he says the wise men cannot show it to the king. But he makes sure Nebuchadnezzar gets the message. There is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets. And what can I say when I look at this? All I can say is that, God says, them that honor me, I will honor. God says, them that honor me, I will honor. It was true then, and it is true forever, brothers and sisters. If you want to be used of God, if you want God to stand up on your behalf and to give you understanding in the presence of those who have no understanding, honor God. It's like it says in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. When you're among people who don't believe in God, speak about God. When you're among people who like to mock God, speak about God. When you're asked about your achievements, give God the glory. When you're in congregations where it is inappropriate to talk about God, talk about God. Maybe this is overdoing it. I think this is overdoing it, but I still am going to mention it, because it kind of illustrates what I'm saying. But there's a brother in Kingston. He is obsessed with the subject of the Godhead. I mean, I believe in the truth about God, but I'm not obsessed. But this brother is obsessed. And there was a brother who was in the independent Adventist movement. If you're a Jamaican, you might know who I'm talking about. His name was Brother Norman McMahon. He was famous among the independents back in the days when I was just a boy. He was prominent in the Brinsmead movement and all of that. Anyway, Brother McMahon contracted cancer and he died. And when the funeral took place, this other brother I'm telling you about, who is obsessed with the truth about God, he also was a part of that same movement, and he was a friend of Brother McMahon. So they got him there to say some words. At a funeral, everybody has the opportunity to give some tributes and so on. And this brother, Brother Lloyd, got up and he said Brother McMahon was a man of God, and he said a few good things about Brother McMahon, but he said, there's only one thing. Brother McMahon never accepted the truth before he died. And right there at the funeral, in the most inappropriate place, this brother gave a little talk about the Trinity and the Godhead. Right there. You can imagine the audience was horrified. I can remember another incident. A friend of mine that went to college with me. I mean, I am zealous, but this brother passes me to the point of fanaticism. He's obsessed with the issue of the mark of the beast. And, you know, one Sabbath he put on a shirt that says, the mark of the beast is Sunday worship. And he went out on the street and he walked around a bit with a placard, walked through the streets of the city, and then he got tired. So he decided to go to church. And when he got to church, he went and he sat right in the front seat. And that day, they were honoring a Catholic priest for some good work he did in the community. They were honoring a Catholic priest in the Adventist church for some good work he did. And his brother went and sat to the front. And the worst thing is, after the sermon, they said, is there anybody who would like to come up for prayer? He shot to the front. He stood up and rushed up to the altar, because I tell you, this brother is like that. He was not trying to make trouble, but he just is obsessed. And if you ask for prayer, if you ask who needs prayer, he's the first to the front. He went up to the front with his shirt, the mark of the beast is Sunday worship, where they were honoring this Catholic man. Now, I'm not saying these guys were the most prudent or discreet, but I'll tell you, I admire their courage. After the service was over, one sister came to this brother and said, we had a wonderful day. You were the only blot on the day. Not that it bothered him. Didn't bother him one bit, you know. But anyway, I diverge a little bit, but I just want to emphasize the point that the true servants of God do not miss any opportunity to speak about God. I don't care if they are going to mock, or they are atheists, or they are going to put down your belief. If the wicked are pushing at you and they are in your face with their ungodliness, and every time you look at a documentary, it talks about evolution, and every time somebody opens his mouth, he talks about the great achievements of men, and God goes lower and lower, and you keep your mouth shut. How does your God come to be elevated if even the servants of God are quiet? Paul says to preach the word when? In season. Fine, we can understand that when you're in a group like this, right? When you're among Christians. But he says out of season. When is that? It's when it's least appropriate and when nobody expects it. And maybe those are the times when we make the greatest impact of all. So Daniel makes sure he sets Nebuchadnezzar straight. I can't show you this thing, but there is a God in heaven who reveals these secrets. And he makes known to thee, O King Nebuchadnezzar, what shall be in the last days. So he tells Nebuchadnezzar, this vision is about the last days. And then he goes on to tell Nebuchadnezzar, your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed are these. Now, right at this point, I will absolutely not be rushing through the rest of the vision, and therefore, I'm going to pause at this point. I'm going to stop at this point and let the rest of the vision, the rest of the chapter remain until next week. Because even though we are so familiar with the vision of the great image, as we go back over it, there are things that we will be refreshed in our thinking about, and there also may be little insights that we might gain that we didn't see before. So I'm going to let this wait until next week. I'm going to stop here. But before I do, I'm going to ask, does anybody have a final comment or maybe a question that you would want to ask before we actually bring the study to a close? All right, I figure that most of the questions Brother Ian asked during the study. So I just want to tell you that I appreciate you all for joining me this evening. It's Sabbath afternoon, and I know that we usually carry on till late, but I can't keep talking for a long, long time in the afternoon after we have gone for the morning. So I usually leave the room open and we are free to discuss, and I can answer maybe one or two questions if I don't have to talk too long. But I'm going to close at this point. I'm going to pray in the recording, and then we can continue talking if we wish. Okay? So let's pray.